Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Seidman with the Chabad House of Delmar, together with my co-host Mark Ronich, just Statewide News Service, jbiztechphilly.com, and as you can see right here, columnist for the Jewish Press.
Right, I have a column in the Jewish Press called the Albany Beat, and I talk about how government relates to the Jewish community, or doesn't, as the case may be. And I have a lot of fun doing all of those things. So I just wanted to let you know, our guest today is Audrey Seidman, a prominent member of the Capital District Jewish community. And we're going to be talking about aging to saging. And so welcome to the Jewish View, Audrey.
Well, thank you very much.
And what is this about, aging to saging?
What is aging to saging? So, as you know, it is inevitable that we will age. And if we're lucky, we'll get to an old age. But it's not inevitable that we will become sages and that we will sage as we're aging. So the story starts that Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi of blessed memory, when he turned 60, had a bit of a midlife crisis or late life crisis and began to wonder what he would do. And he became depressed and took himself on a 40-day retreat in New Mexico. And on that retreat, he did a great deal of processing. And he emerged from that dedicated to do a lot of research on gerontology, which by then was a pretty big topic. Mm-hmm. He talked to religious leaders from different pathways, and he focused on how we deepen our lives and harvest our lives in the process of growing older, and that we prepare ourselves for the inevitable end that we will all face of death. Mm-hmm. And he wrote this book, Aging to Saging, which has been out quite a while. And now his students are teaching this path. He began to teach it. He created actually the Eldering Institute, mm-hmm. which is an ecumenical organization that taught teachers how to help others through this saging process. And then years ago, Reb Zalman said to his students, I want you to do this in a Jewish context. It's nice that it's being done in a secular or ecumenical context, but this should be part of the Jewish learning community. And so they created, through Aleph, the Alliance for Jewish Renewal, a saging mentorship program that takes us, and I just completed that program last week in early November.
Mazel tov.
Thank you very much. Takes us through a series of experiential workshops. One is actually called Aging to Saging, and the other is called Death is a Homecoming. Mm. And I could certainly tell you how participating in that affected my own life. Because when we contemplate our death, the purpose of doing that is to help us live more richly, to help us focus more. You know, Annie Dillard says something like, our days are our lives. Right. How we live our days is our lives. Mm. So if we live in a way that's unfocused, not aware of our purpose in life, mm-hmm. not aware of how we wish to receive and give to others, mm-hmm. then we're losing those days. Mm-hmm. But when we face our mortality and prepare for that in some way, I believe it enriches our lives, and that's the teaching of Reb Zalman that we share.
Wow.
So the program takes people through, and anybody could take those 2 sessions. And then there's 2 more sessions for those who wish to teach it, how to teach this work, and then demonstrating.
Did you take those also?
Yes, that's what I've just completed.
Okay. Where is this?
Where? So it happens in different retreat centers. I took the first session at an Aleph Kala that happened to be in New Hampshire. It'll be taught again, actually, this July at Stony Point Retreat in New York at Ruach HaAretz is having a retreat, and Behira Sugarman And Rabbi Shaya Eisenberg will be teaching the first session of it next July 10th to 16th, I think it is, in Rockland County. What a blessing and opportunity that it comes so close. I took the second one in Tampa, and the third session in Tampa, and then this last concluding session, I was just at the Pearlstone Retreat Center in Reisterstown, Maryland. A beautiful Jewish retreat center on a farmland. I had the blessing of a second peak fall season.
But these places are permanently Jewish, like say a Jewish
No.
retreat, or it's just rented
Well,
out?
right, no, Pearlstone is a Jewish retreat center,
Yeah.
fully kosher, a fully Jewish retreat center. However, the Tampa location we used is actually a Christian retreat center, and we rent it, and they're very hospitable to us. And it's just a good a location where our teachers have a positive relationship that has the facilities that we need at a price we could afford.
So what would be your message as a teacher to your students about this?
Well, there's a lot of messages. First of all, there's a lot to say. And one could read the book. And the exercises that we often lead people through are right in the book. But I'll tell you what I've learned. I've now offered 2 series of workshops on this. The first series that I ran was through Ramon, a Jewish spirituality center located in the Berkshires. And I just concluded yesterday a 4-part series for Jewish Family Services in Albany. And what I've learned is that doing this in community is really important. And I was thinking on the way over here that it's something like prayer. We can all, sit in our homes and pray. But when we do so in a minyan, there's an extra energy. There's something enriching about davening in a minyan that we get. And it's the same for saging work, that we could contemplate, who is it in our lives we have to forgive, and how do we do that work? And we could open the book and run ourselves through some of these exercises that Reb Zalman has designed to help us do that work of identifying and forgiving, or working on peeling the layers of forgiveness. And doing this in community and sharing with each other, I have witnessed how people grow by listening to each other and by being able to share with each other and do this dynamically in a group over a period of time.
It's interesting because I always like to just cut through red tape and just do things, because I always say it's easier to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission. And you talk about forgiveness. And I'm hoping that, I always hope that people will rely on that real heavily.
Right.
Because
right.
I can get a lot more done if people are out of my way, and, I can get to accomplish goals that way.
Well, and forgiveness is a daily practice, of course, in the bedtime Shema, and Reb Zalman offers, we have it in our guidebook that we offer that to people, his translation of every night. We offer forgiveness for those who may have hurt us, and ask forgiveness for those we may have hurt intentionally or unintentionally. And there may be incidents in our lives, whether it's long ago or last week, that we still have work to do. Because when we get to that place of being ready to leave this world, we want to do so with a clear heart and do as much work as we can. There are certain things in this world that are indeed unforgivable in some ways, but Reb Zalman talks about how when we hold grudges and anger in our own heart, we may be jailing the perpetuator who hurt us in our heart, but as the jailer, we are really imprisoning ourselves as well.
Well, when the Pope forgave the person who shot him, and Reagan forgave the person who shot him, it's just, people just say, how could you? How could you?
Right.
And, you're explaining it. you
Well,
know.
and what we say, forgiveness doesn't mean condoning an act.
Right.
I forgive you, which means I don't hold the anger in my heart now, right? I mean,
Right.
it doesn't mean that I'm okay with what you did, whatever it is. No, it means I'm not going to let this weigh on my heart and diminish my life any longer.
Right, right. That's right. And people just think that it's condoning and they don't understand what forgiveness means. So what would be, going through all this coursework, what was one of the most poignant points that you found through this coursework?
In my own life.
In your own,
So I'll tell you. I'd been working at an agency in New York State, and I knew that I was heading towards a shift in my life, and I ended up getting a compressed schedule, they call it, so I could go to the office 4 days a week. I worked 4 long days.
Well, 4 10-hour days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I like that.
what I did was I got a day off and I applied for a program at Albany Med called Clinical Pastoral Education. And I worked for a year every Monday learning to be a student of pastoral care, which had me be a chaplain at Albany Medical Center. And so I did that for a year, one day a week. It was an amazingly transformative, rewarding experience. And then I went back to work 5 days a week.
Oh.
And then I went to the Death is a Homecoming class.
Mm-hmm.
And I came out of that saying, I need to do more of that kind of work. I need to transition. And if I have to lose salary, I'll lose salary. And so I applied to go back to Albany Med, and I ended up getting accepted for the 2-day program, which meant I reduced my work to a 70% schedule. And, worked, again, long days, but used a lot of vacation time. And with all that, I just had this clearer picture of where I had to be and what I had to do because I faced my own mortality. And, when we count from our age to 120,
Yeah.
I have to say when I do that, from my age, which is 63, to 90 feels really short. So I don't want to waste my days. I want to do what I want. And then a few months after I completed that 2-day-a-week program, I put in for my retirement, which doesn't mean I'm sitting at home, just taking yoga, although I finally have made time for yoga. But this is the work that is, my focus at the moment.
And, when you said Reb Zalman was 60 when he had a midlife crisis.
Right, that's
Well,
when.
60 is half of 120, so
Right.
it literally is midlife crisis.
Halftime.
Yeah.
And may you live to be 120.
Well,
so.
thank you. Thank you. He made it to 89, and I think all the work he did, from what I understand, helped him to go peacefully. He had done his work. He had the Just In Case book already. He had a Hebrew name for it that's not coming to me now. But he had the book. How many of us have these conversations? I am blessed. My parents, who, thank God, are both alive. I still have 2 parents in their 80s.
Wow.
And they have always been able to talk about their death. They've prearranged it. Everything is paid for. I have an 800 number. They're in Florida. And so, but I also have a friend who can't have that conversation openly with her parents yet. She's working towards that. But how many of us are able to engage and say, and I'll tell you one of the things I learned working at Albany Med, is we need to think about what will happen if something horrendous happens to us.
Yeah.
And put those things in writing. Put those things in
It's
writing.
very difficult. And, personally, my mother has a little bit of a difficulty dealing with, she just turned 89, and she has a little bit of a difficulty talking about the end of life. There are times when she wants to talk about it and she gets things set aside and she says, this is the drawer you go to first, this is the drawer you go to second,
Yep.
this is the third thing that you do, and
Right.
then you call this person, you call that person.
That's
and
beautiful.
then
Yeah.
but then she has moments that she won't ever want
She
to
won't go
talk
there.
about it. My uncle, my father's brother, has a penchant where he wants everything, he wants to know what his funeral and everything will look like. So he wants his, for example, his stone already engraved ahead of time while he's alive,
Right.
except without the date of death, which you could put on engraved later.
Right.
But he wants to see it. He doesn't want to trust anyone that they're going to follow his orders. He wants that stone done already.
Right.
And so you can get a little bit far-fetched if you
Right.
depending on how far you want to go with prearranging things.
Right. Certainly, I've known people who have certainly orchestrated their own memorial services, and others who have just sort of implied some desires. But isn't it beautiful that we have the opportunity to think about how we want to be remembered, which is another really significant part of Reb Zalman's work, is that we each consider what is our legacy, and that we harvest our lives in a way, he calls it the spiritual alchemy, that takes some of our difficulty and turns it into wisdom. That by thinking about how we've been hurt and thinking about all the life experience that we bring, what is it that we want to pass along to the next generation? The ethical will, for example. Yesterday when I was working with the class that I had, their homework was to come in with either an obituary, an ethical will, or a vidui. And this vidui is a little bit more expansive than the traditional vidui. It still addresses God, but says, here are some of the things I'm proud of. Here are some of the things I regret in my life. And, how many of us, by writing an ethical will, helps us to focus on what is important? What do I want to communicate to my niece, my nephew, the young people in my life? These exercises give us rich opportunities to really contemplate these things.
It says, because I'm a rabbi, so you have to bring in some rabbinical writings.
Please.
That it says really in Pirkei Avos, the ethics of our fathers, says a person should always repent one day before you die. The question is, well, how do you know what the next day is going to be? It says, well, then you repent every day, so again, you regret. But I know the Lubavitcher Rebbe in New York, he always didn't let anybody retire. I mean, if God gave you more time, then that's something to be accomplished. And it just brought home the story to me. People had audiences. You're talking about the 1970s. Later on, it got too much for the Rebbe. But these two older people, I shouldn't say because they have white beards, and I'm 29, so I'm far away from that age. But in any case, older Hasidim, and they came out of the audience with the Rebbe and saying, I'll say in Yiddish, weiter gehen, weiter arbeit. Let's go further work. It's not like the Rebbe pat them on the head. Oh, your whole lifetime of work and, retire to Miami Beach. It's time for it. And the Rebbe would just, there's something more useful. And if anything, on the contrary, you say aging and saging, that actually it says that if you're smart at least, if the older you get, the more wise. And the Rebbe bemoaned always our society where, always what's the youngest people? What are the teenagers into? Well, I got to look like that teenager. And says, well, why don't you, the society, look at older people? They're more experienced, they're wise, they have, of course, like we just said, life experiences. The young people should learn from the old, but in our society, you're over the hill, you're worthless. What's the latest thing on TV, the latest fashions? And the Rebbe always, it really isn't the Jewish concept. The Jewish concept is these older people have learned and experienced. And, again, that's what I bemoan also, that people don't look at history. That's old history. What's happening today in the 21st century? Well, you're a person, you just didn't float in from Mars. You have genes from parents and grandparents, and they've been formed, like for example, Jewish people, well, I just like giving charity. Says, well, where did you think you got that from? You had that feeling because it's your parents and grandparents. They were learning Torah, and Torah, the Judaism always pushes and emphasizes how much charity should be given. So it's it's in your, they think they just came into themselves. I feel like, yeah, I have a cause for humanity, whatever it is. And I says, well, you're getting that because you're Jewish heritage.
Yeah, I appreciate that point. And, and part of what we do as we begin this work is think about what are the images of aging that we're carrying in us. And, I think until maybe a century ago, elders in all societies were revered. And so in Jewish society as well, our elder was somebody who we had to respect. And I think it's this new commercialized youth culture consumerism that has begun to shift that. And I think that this aging to saging work is trying to, I think, respond to what you're raising about we need to shift back. We need to support the younger generations and hear what they're interested in and be there to support them with our wisdom that we have gained. It's not that and I say this to some, we're not smarter necessarily in our IQs, but we have 60 years of life experience that they don't yet have. How does that inform what we want to say?
Well, I always say history was easier when I took it in school because there was less of it.
There was less of it, right.
That's what I tell the students now.
Right.
What is a wisdom keeper?
Well, I think this is exactly what we're talking about. This is it.
Yeah.
So that we have experience and knowledge that we can help. And so to pass that along, we think about mentoring. I ran a mentoring program, at my state agency. And now we're talking about how do we want to mentor the next generation? Well, it certainly doesn't happen by saying, listen, I know what to do, listen, but it comes through a listening to their needs and once in a while, offering a little pearl, a piece of wisdom from our lives that we can pass along.
Rabbi Zalman here said, then what are elders? They are worship keepers. They are pioneers in consciousness. Serving as mentors, they pass on the distilled essence of their life experience.
Right.
So I think that's powerful. I really do. Harvest the wisdom of our life experience to enrich the present moment, face our mortality and learn from it, mature in our relationship and in our communities, develop our regenerative spirit, and take active leadership roles in society.
Right, and really that last piece says that even though we want to mentor the younger people, we're not going to do this from our rocking chairs, that we have something to offer to society and that we as elders are actually in some ways obligated to contribute to society and to be active in some way. And certainly there's lots of opportunities to do that, lots of ways, and it's for us to discern what is our gift, what is our sacred offering, what is it that we can give that no one else can give necessarily, and where do we want to make our difference? When we're on our deathbeds, people don't say, I wish I worked more. One of the things that I know is that relationships are really important, and being part of a community is really important. And these are the things we need to think about.
People change. It's always interesting to me because, of course I counsel many people too, but it's hard to change. But, just to change people's values, just the way I've been doing it, for so long. But, it is an opportunity. Every life situation is, of course, an opportunity to, hey, like you were saying about Schechter, that, hey, you're 6 years old, midlife, or what do you say, older life crisis, as you're saying. So that's maybe a time and opportunity instead of getting depressed of just switching your value system around, like you say, work. Maybe you should gear yourself to something more meaningful. So these, everything in life is really an opportunity. Sometimes it's it's an obstacle, but then it really becomes an opportunity to shift your things. Then people coming to get counseling. And, it's interesting. And my wife, that she works a lot with the old age homes. And, she asked me to speak. And one of the things is, again, society and either their families is, you're gone, you go to Miami Beach, you're in the old age home, just, I like you. It's nice surrounding, just vegetate and fade away. I mean, people don't say those words, of course, but, in a way, that's kind of their feelings is, no, there's so much that you could help other people with. You're on your 80s, or some people are in their 90s. There's so much, we like you just listening to their stories.
Absolutely.
That they've gone through World War II, for example, or, what it meant. There's really so much that they can offer. And it really is the shame of society where young people are just not inclined to listen. They just want, what's the latest headline, and, what's in today's paper.
Yeah.
But there's so much worthwhile. But sometimes it's hard for old people to listen to it. I says, you have so much to offer, and don't worry, I'll just sit here, I'll mind my own business. It's hard to change people's attitudes in that sense.
Yeah, and storytelling is so important.
Do you think you can organize a retreat for in the Capital District, whether it be, and we have so many places around here. I just was wondering if you can organize a retreat for the Olive
For this
program.
work?
Yeah.
Well, I've organized already a series of workshops. I did a 4-session that we used Ohav Shalom as a location, and the sponsor was Jewish Family Services, and we actually agreed yesterday to do a 5th session in December on saging in community, our need for community. I would be willing to consider offering this in any format that this community would like.
There's Camp Dippykill, which is a great retreat.
Yeah.
There's the in Rensselaerville. There's a retreat center in Rensselaerville.
Right. That would be an intense way to do it. If you're talking about a 1-week retreat of this whole program, that would be something that would be quite an endeavor. But
it takes a couple of years to plan.
But we could do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that would be phenomenal for this area and to get the publicity, and because this really needs to be out there more on the national news, and you have to get.
Well, our society is aging, right?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. It's really that's a really fast growing.
We're going to outdo Social Security,
They worry about Social Security, and money, of course, is important. You need to live. But like I say, quality of life. One social worker told me that people 100 and older is the fastest, not growing, but percentage-wise, group of tens of decades that are growing. So you're dealing with people, retired 60, of course, I know people work in 90s, but all right, 60, 65. You got 30 years. You got a lifetime just of time that is the opportunity, and just to, like I say, vegetate and just go golfing or sitting. Sorry for the golfers, all right. But, fine, go golfing, but if you have to have some more meaning in life.
Right.
I'm saying doing something. So really, and there's so many now. The baby boomers are just hitting that age. 60s, 70s.
My mother always had this plan for me because she comes out of the New York City school system. She said, I graduated college when I was 20. And she said, so get a government job till you're 40 and get that pension, and then go on to another job and you get a second pension for 20 years, after 20 years. So you're 60, and then you got 2 pensions coming in. Well, she didn't realize that by the time I turned 60, those 2 pensions wouldn't amount to very much because of inflation and high cost of living and what so you'd have to have another 20 years until you're 80 with a third career,
Right. And speaking of 80, I want to mention that Reb Zalman wrote a follow-up book because he became aware in his 80s that the life experience when you're in your 80s is different than when you're in your 60s and 70s.
Oh, that's interesting.
And he wrote a book that he called the December Project, because one of the exercises he invites us to do is called the cycle of life, where we break our lives into the biblical 7-year periods and look at who were our influencers at that point and what were some of the key events of this 7-year period. So I'm at the end of September, in my 63. But October and November, and then come the December years from 78 and older. And physically especially, but in many ways, they become very different. And so he has a whole different book about what that was for him. Actually, Sarah Davidson interviewed him for that book. She really wrote it based on a series of interviews with him that were completed not long before he passed.
Well, it's we just one of our guests that we've had a few times is Senator Hugh Farley. He's just retiring, and he's 85 years old, and he could go on for probably at least another 10, 20 years if he didn't retire from the Senate. But it depends how healthy you are. I told him, I said, I look at Senator Bill Larkin and Senator Hugh Farley, and the two of them, about the same age within a couple of years. And, Senator Bill Larkin's walking around in crutches and a cane and all sorts of health issues, and Senator Farley's robust and, running. So, it all depends. I mean, it's your own physiology that really carries you through, and, you just have to, hopefully, there are people whose bodies fail, their minds are good, people whose minds fail and bodies are good. And my grandmother had dementia for about 20 years, of her last 20 years of her life, and she every year we take her to the doctor would say, hey, you're in perfect health except for your mind.
Mark, I don't know if end up on a good note.
Well, that's
but in
dementia.
Any case,
that's the end of life.
Well, in any case, we want to thank you. Hopefully, our viewers use the years and the times that they have for positive purpose. And thank you very much for being on.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.